Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Andy Geenat. I'm the State EMS Director for Wyoming. Many of you know me and have met me. Really do appreciate everybody signing up and taking time out of your day to join us for this webinar. Quite a large list of folks that signed on, so that's exciting. It's good to be able to talk to all of you and help get the word out. Just once again, please double check all of your mics or your phones or whatever you're dialed in to make sure that you're muted. If we start getting background noise, where I seem to have some issues with the mute all on this side, but if your phone is unmuted and we start getting noise, it's going to make it really hard. Ken McCarthy. Okay, at any rate, thanks again. We're going to get rolling. It's been a while since we've done one of these webinars related to potential rule changes, but this is a fairly significant one that we're doing, and some of these things are long overdue. So with that being said, spend a little bit of time. It's going to take a little time to walk you through, if you've never seen the site, to walk you through how you find the rules. So that link that's appearing on your screen right now, that will take you to the LSO website. And what you want to look for is the Wyoming Emergency Medical Services Act of 1977. And when that LSO site pops up, it'll show you all of the state statutes, and you need to drill down until you find Title 33, Chapter 36, 101. That's the EMS Act of 1977. Here's how you drive to that point. Once you follow that link, you'll look for the left-hand side. You'll see state statutes and Constitution. You can click that, and then you'll see at the bottom of this page where the arrow indicates, you'll see Wyoming statutes annotated. If it's been a while since you've been on there, the LSO has kind of updated their website, so it's going to look and feel a little bit different. They had some good improvements made there, but at any rate, click the agree to the terms and conditions, and then you're going to look down the list that will show up, and you want to scroll down until you get to Title 33, and then in the blue font that you see there, 101 all the way through 115, that's the EMS Act. Now the arrow at the bottom is showing a new section based off of the adoption of replica last year. So there's Article 1, which is all of the original stuff about how we traditionally do EMS, and then Article 2 specifically is about replica. So if you're looking for replica, that's where you find it. Look for Article 2 in there. And hey, by the way, as we go through this, if you have a question, go ahead and pull up your chat window and type your question in there. I'm going to wait and answer questions when we get to the end of this, but I want to be able to speak to people specifically rather than just throwing all the phones open and saying, hey, who's got a question, because we'll have mass confusion going on. So just type your question in the chat box, or even just type I've got a question, and we'll call you out when we get to that point, if that makes sense. All right, so why do we do this? So this is the same reason why we do all of these webinars. It's to give you folks in the field a look at potential rule changes, so that you get a chance to talk to us and give us your suggestions and comments and corrections before we actually get into the rule promulgation process. So one of the things that I always point out when I say this is that, even if you don't catch something today, or you don't have a question today, and 2 days later, or even once we start the rule adoption process, that's all still available to you. This is just kind of an added opportunity for you guys to interact with us about changes to rule. So that's really what I want to get out of here. What we're going to do today is if you really read through these with a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying glass, you're going to see lots of verbiage changes. So I'm really going to try to call your attention to what I think the most significant ones are. But I don't want you to think I'm glossing over anything else that's in there. If you see something, just let me know. But you can certainly ask a question about that, even if I don't mention it specifically today. But I really tried to maintain the the content and intent of the existing rule, but try to clean a lot of stuff up and get some major changes in there. So that's why we're here today. All right, so the first big thing is that we're proposing to repeal all of Chapter 5. Why would we do that? Well, if you've been around the state for a while, you'll know that I think it was 2 years ago or so, we went through a major change to Chapter 5. And after it finalized, about a month and a half after that happened, the Legislative Services Office came back with an entire page of corrections that they wanted made the next time that we opened up Chapter 5 for doing revisions. A lot of those suggested changes were language, use of acronyms. They don't seem to we're having trouble with acronyms like EMT, even though the rest of us don't. They even mentioned things like disconjugate sentences. I don't even know what that is. So if you know what a disconjugate sentence is, go ahead and put that in the chat window and I'll read it to everybody. But nevertheless, the point is that there were so many changes that we determined needed to be done to Chapter 5 that we decided to strike what we're proposing is to just strike the whole thing, just get rid of it and break it up into 2 chapters. The current Chapter 5 has the scope of practice kind of embedded right in the middle of it, and it kind of makes Chapter 5 hard to read and understand. So we're going to just create the whole thing, or delete the whole thing and create 2 whole new chapters. All right, so Chapter 16 basically has all of the content, with the exception of scope of practice stuff. It has all of the content that exists in the current Chapter 5, and these are the sections that will appear when you look at the proposed Chapter 16. So on the slide, what you see shown in bold red font, those are the 3 big sections that I want to talk to you about today. The other sections that are in black font, there may be changes, slight changes within some of the language, or correcting some spelling, or some punctuation or something like that. But I believe that the general intent and the general message and what those sections regulate has not significantly changed. So that's where I'm saying if you see something in Section 4, for example, that looks strikingly different, please let me know, ask me about it. We may have inadvertently lost something in there, but the 3 big sections I want to talk about are 1, 6, and 14. All right, so in Chapter 16, the first thing that you're going to notice is that we begin with Section 1, definitions. This is all new. You won't see this necessarily in Chapter 5. The reason is that when you write rules, sometimes it's good to have definitions and sometimes it's not. But we received a lot of counsel from the Attorney General's office that we needed to define some of these terms. So there's a lot of definitions in there that they may look and they may feel like we are now defining new things. And I would tell you that they're not new things in terms of what we would say are acts that an EMS provider should not be involved in. For example, abuse. We've now defined what abuse is. We would have taken an action prior to this, but by writing a definition about what we say abuse is, that puts us on a little more legal, a sure legal footing if and when we take an action. So that's my second bullet point there, to say that the ideology has not changed. We're just spelling it out and defining it so that we have a much clearer picture. And a lot of what you see in there, not everything, but a lot of what you see in there is related to investigations, complaints we've received, investigations that we've done, and in thinking about some long-term downstream implications of what the rules exist for. So moving on, Chapter 16, Section 6, examination requirements. This is a major change. So this is the change that will officially bring the National Registry to Wyoming. So what you see in front of you, if you've got the draft rules, and I should have mentioned that too, I tried to send them out with the invite. We'll get them hung up on the website if they're not already, so that you can take a look at them if you want. And if you don't have them and you want them, just email me or somebody in the office, and we can send you what we've got right now. So you've got in front of you, what we're proposing is that EMRs will still be able to take, we're going to maintain the state exam. They can take that one and they can receive their license from us, or if they want to, they can go and take the National Registry exam. So for the EMRs, it's an either or. For the intermediate EMTs, we're still going to have to maintain a state exam for those people that we license at the intermediate EMT level. That is because there is no National Registry equivalent for the intermediate exam. Now that even the intermediate exam may evolve in the future as we try to continue to streamline process and make sure that we've got better validated exams. But we can't require you to take a National Registry exam because there is no National Registry exam for you. EMTs, AEMTs, and paramedics, you must take the National Registry exam. Why do this? Well, if we're paying attention during the replica session, that is a requirement of the replica compact, which again, like I said, is now Article 2 to the EMS Act. But I think that more relevant than even replica, and I hope that you guys all see this and believe it, it's the right thing to do to move our profession forward, to go to a standardized exam at all of the levels. So moving on, Section 14, emergency licensing. This is actually based on new authority from a bill that was passed some time ago. We had kind of held off on it because we were trying to figure out exactly how this would work and whether we could capture this quickly in owls. Some of you are probably familiar that, particularly with the wildfire responses, that you know, the way that we were working around the licensing issue to get folks that were coming in for wildfire response was that we were doing the conditional licensing, and that actually worked pretty well. We were able to quickly license some folks and get them into the field. So under this authority now, we will have an even faster way, I hope, to get folks in under an emergency license. And this could also apply, while replica solves some of our problems related to licensing in emergencies, whether it's a wildland fire, a public health emergency, or a major disaster. It only solves those problems if the state from which the person is coming is also a replica state. And as of right now, in our neighborhood, Montana is not part of replica, so that's a prime example. A Montana EMT or paramedic would not be able to come into Wyoming and be licensed under the authority of replica, but they could come in under this authority related to emergency licensing. So I think by the time that we get this all through and done, and we get all of replica stood up where it needs to be, there shouldn't be any reason why we can't get somebody licensed in for at least a short amount of time. So it should be faster than conditional licensing, but note this as it relates to the emergency license. It expires under one of three conditions. Either the EMS office receives a notice that the emergency is over, the governor repeals a declaration, incident command contacts us and says, hey, the fire is over, we're done with it, something like that, or a notification that the licensee is no longer needed. So in that scenario, you imagine a fire scene in which we're starting to get under control, we're scaling back operations, incident command maybe contacts us and says, hey, we don't need these folks anymore, they're going back home, and so they've been released by command. And in the absence of any of those, it's 90 days. So it's whichever one comes first. All right, so how do you get one of these emergency licenses? We're going to set this up so that it can go through OWLS electronically, or we are also going to include the option, because this works better in some instances, particularly for the wildfire. We're going to accept the National Wildfire Coordinating Group request that'll come into our office saying, hey, these are the Joes and the Janes that are coming in to fight the fire. Here's their cards, and we're going to turn it around right then. So just a couple of fine points. We can deny an emergency license. We don't have to issue one if there in fact is not an emergency. So an individual EMT, for example, that says, I need to be licensed because I have to go to work in Evanston because they just hired me. Nope, that doesn't count as an emergency, and we'll deny that request. We can, or if we find out that we're receiving fraudulent or incomplete information with the request for complete information or incomplete information, we can deny it. We can either issue it, we don't have to issue it at the level that is requested. I don't know what scenario we might do this, but we wrote that clause in there as a placeholder, basically, for something that may come up. So a person may apply for an emergency license as a paramedic. If we have some reason to believe that that should not be issued as a paramedic level, we might say, we're going to give you a license, but you can only operate at the EMT or the AEMT level. Like I said, I can't imagine a scenario in which we would actually need to do that, but the possibility exists. And we can also restrict it and say, okay, well, you're a paramedic or an EMT, but we're going to eliminate these things from the scope of practice for this event. And then, of course, the emergency, and someone that receives an emergency license under this authority has to comply with the scope of practice. So that's all of Chapter 16. I know I went through it pretty fast, but like I said, we're going to have a chance to answer questions, and we're recording this, right? And we are recording it, so the presentation will be available later. All right, so Chapter 17, scope of practice. Now, some of you may be wondering, Andy, what happened to Chapter 5 if you repealed it? Well, the way that the Wyoming rules work, once you repeal a chapter, it's gone forever. So we're going to end up with an entire set of rules that are going to read 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And that's based on the assumption that we don't repeal 1, 2, 3, or 4. So the way that it works is you just keep extending the numbers out. Once the repeal goes through, there'll no longer be a Chapter 5. And by the way, I should have mentioned that we did catch already that the page numbers on the draft rules are all wrong. So first correction that I'm going to have to make is to fix the page numbers. But at any rate, back to Chapter 17, scope of practice. So this is essentially the central portion of the existing Chapter 5, which is now going to become its own chapter. And I think it's actually going to work better in the future as we have, the smaller that a chapter is and the more focused it is, it tends to be a lot easier to make additions or deletions or changes in the future. So I think this is really going to be a good deal. Plus, it makes each of the chapters read a little smoother if you separate it out. All right, so we're going to talk just a little bit about how the scope of practice in Wyoming is built, because I think there's a lot of confusion that still remains, and I want to do anything I can to help clear that up. So the first thing that you'll see in Section 1 of Chapter 17, of the new Chapter 17, this is not new, it's been incorporated by reference for a while, but I want you to pick up on this right off the bat, is that we incorporate by reference the National EMS Scope of Practice Model. Now, if you're really, really, really paying attention to what's going on in EMS across the nation, then you are already aware that there's been a lot of work to revise the National EMS Scope of Practice Model. And they have just about finalized that. The problem is that NHTSA has yet to hang that out in a public place, the revisions that is, where we can see it and we can link to it. I can't incorporate it by reference unless I can tell you where it is that you can find it. So yes, it is true. Almost as soon as we get Chapter 17 finalized, we will probably have to go back in there and and revise this to incorporate the new version. But at any rate, the scope of practice in Wyoming begins with this document, the National EMS Scope of Practice Model. That's what it looks like when you see it, and there's a link down there at the bottom where you can find the document. And again, if you can't manage to locate this, we have a link to this on the website, on our website, where you can download it. But if you can't find it, please let us know. We will send it to you. In that middle part there, what you will see is all of the levels with the little equations out there as to what they equal. So starting from the top, what this means is that the scope of practice for an EMR in the state is the National EMS Scope of Practice Model. That's what I mean by the SOP model. And then we plus or minus it. So that's important to understand because it originates with that document that's there, that you see pictured in that slide. For the EMT, then, they get everything that the EMR does, and then they get the plus or minus. And the plus or minus portion is what you will find down in the rules. AEMTs, of course, then build off of the EMTs plus or minus, and then IEMTs build off of the AMTs plus or minus, and then the paramedic, yes, it's true, you're the IEMT plus or minus, but there really are no additions or subtractions for the paramedic scope of practice. So really, for paramedics, you just refer to the National EMS Scope of Practice Model. That's where you find your scope of practice. I hope that makes sense. I was really struggling to figure out how I can explain this to you. But I've had some questions come up about, can I do this or can I do that? And I think that confusion rests in people not understanding that there is an entire other document out there that you need in order to figure out what your scope of practice is. So I encourage you, especially if you're a service director or a physician medical director, go out, get that thing, download it, read it. There's a lot of information in there, especially if you are operating at the paramedic level. Okay, Section 2 covers the duties of a physician medical director. There's not a huge change on this one from what it was in Chapter 5, but I did want to call out that bottom bullet there. There's no real changes, but a lot of agencies and physician medical directors seem blissfully unaware that they actually have responsibilities as it relates to being a physician medical director. So to all of you, EMT, paramedic, EMR, firefighter, service director, flight paramedic, flight nurse types, I would ask of you, I'm begging of you, find your physician medical director, make them sit down, buy them a cup of coffee if you have to, but make them sit down and understand the very minimal duties that we spell out in here. Essentially what you're looking at is that the requirement is on the physician medical director to be involved, particularly with the development of and publication of the protocols and standing orders. They have to sign them, they have to vet them, go, yes, this is the way I want you to do emergency medicine. They have to sign them so that that's an official order for you to take action on. And then if you do any adoptions, they have to review them at least once every 2 years, where they go, yep, I did my I don't know what it is, bi-yearly, I guess, biannual review of these protocols. I'm not making any changes. I've reviewed them. They're good to go. And then, of course, if you do any adopt any amendments or changes, institute something new, then that also has to be incorporated in the protocols by signatures. So again, this is where I'm calling on my EMTs and paramedics and EMRs and everybody else. Sit your physician medical directors down, get them involved, get them engaged. All right, scope of practice for an EMR. There's two big changes for this level. So what's new is that we've included the use of epinephrine for anaphylaxis with an auto-injector, an EpiPen. No longer, so it basically will eliminate the idea that the EpiPen is a self-assisted medication. So you can drop that question, or start dropping that verbiage from your lingo.
Okay.
The other big change for EMRs, putting intranasal Narcan, or there is a variant of a Narcan that's available via auto-injector. So this is putting 2 new medications in the hands of EMRs. What's that mean if I'm running an EMR organization, or if I am an EMR? It means you need a protocol or a standing order to do that still, and you need some training. I don't think that it has to be extensive. We're working on developing something in here that you can, some boilerplate stuff that you can use to do this in your agency or in your hometown. But don't take the light switch approach and just think you can flip this on and hand Narcan to these folks. Teach them about what it means and what it is that they're doing that. And why am I stressing that? Well, look at that bottom point right there. Many of you participated in the survey that we did related to usage of Narcan within Wyoming. And one of the most striking things that came out of that was that 20% of the people that responded to that didn't even know if their service has a protocol for Narcan. Now, it's one thing to say, nope, we don't have one, but it's another to say, I don't know. What that tells me is that we're not doing a good job of communicating with folks about how we function as EMS and what they need to know. So please, get a medical director, get them to create a protocol or standing order for you, and then get the training in that you need at the local level. EMTs. We've got some major changes coming in here. Now remember that EMTs do the acts of an EMR, which now includes the intranasal or the auto-injector for intramuscular Narcan. So that's also included for EMTs. And then I think this one is an important change for you to be aware of. Many of you have run into how expensive the EpiPens are. So we're going to start authorizing EMTs to administer IM epinephrine using a traditional needle and syringe. You're not going to be required to, you're not going to be limited to just the auto-injector. Now, if you, in your service, make a decision to say, you know what, we're just going to stay with EpiPens, that's fine. You can keep the auto-injectors. But I think that this is going to help alleviate some of the financial burden as it relates to the EpiPens. Now, that obviously is going to be a new skill for many people. They've never done an IM injection before. No, it's not super complicated, but that does mean that you need to figure out what it is that you're doing. You need to make sure that your folks know how to draw up whatever it is, that amount that your medical director wants you to give, and perform an IM injection. So that means you need a protocol, standing order, and training. AEMTs. So again, so the Narcan was already included in the scope of practice for an AEMT. Just a fine point in case anybody asks, because Narcan as a medication is approved for use by the AEMTs, we really don't make a distinction whether you're giving it intranasal or you're giving it via an IM injection. You can use either route. So the big changes here, this was an inadvertent exclusion when we last changed Chapter 5. The scope of practice model that we talked about for the AEMT only references gaining intraosseous access on pediatric patients. And we've allowed intraosseous access at the intermediate levels on both adult and pediatrics for quite some time. So that was an oversight. So we're clarifying that in there. Now that may be a change in your local service. If you've never done adult IO or never done pediatric IOs, then you may need to get an in-service on that and make sure that you can do them both. It also includes, and this was at the request of someone from the field, and it made sense to me, it made sense to the Governor's Advisory Committee. So we allowed the authorization for lidocaine as it relates to a local anesthetic during IO access. All right, so once again, you need protocols or standing orders, and you need training. And by now, you should see a theme developing about all of these changes. All right, intermediates. So here's the big change for you, or the big changes for you folks. We went ahead and we codified the authorized medications in rule. I do not believe that that has ever been done before. I'm looking at Bob, Dean, and Colleen, and they're shaking their heads no. So so we're putting it into rule. So why would we do that after, I don't know, 20 to 30 years of intermediates existing in Wyoming? Well, the reason is that there's actually a legal loophole that exists in the way that what we have always done is said, basically goes, as many of you are familiar with, if you want to know what medications you can give, go see this list of authorized medications, you know, here. And there's some legal questions as to whether or not that's actually legitimate, because simply producing an interpretive guideline or producing a list of medications may or may not actually be something that can be legally done. So counsel was, all right, well, the only way we can make sure that that loophole is closed is by adding it into the rule. Now, I do realize that, you know, somebody's going to say, well, gosh, what happens when medicine changes and we decide that we're no longer giving amiodarone? Well, yep, I get it. We're going to have to go back in and we're going to have to change rules. But we're ending up on much more solid ground. That's the difficulty that you run into when you don't have a national standardized scope of practice, like the scope of practice model on which you can rely. You're having to create something that's unique to Wyoming, and that means the only way that you can get it done is by putting it down in black and white. As you look at that list, and I've done this to myself about 2 or 3 times, and I did it again last night as I was even working on this presentation. As you look at that list, it might look a little funky, and you're going to go, wait a minute, why isn't the 50 in this list of authorized medications? Well, the reminder there for you is that the IEMT is everything that the AEMT does, plus or minus. Okay? So if you see, you will see things missing from the list of medications there that you've always done, like D50, Narcan. I can't think of the rest of them off the top of my head. Glucagon might be, I don't remember if that's one. But if it's not listed there, it's probably because it's included in the AEMT National Scope of Practice Model. So go back and take a look at what the AEMTs can do, and then come back to the IEMT authorized medications list and add the two together, and you should come up with it. And we're going to update the interpretive guideline that we've got out online to make sure that we've incorporated all of these changes as they fall in there. But that's how you get there. I don't want you to be alarmed. We're not taking D50 out of the intermediate scope of practice. It's just not saying something twice. So then the other new addition, which was also at the request of many of you about how you do business, and that seemed to make sense to us and seemed to make sense to the Governor's Committee, was the authority to monitor and transport patients with existing antibiotic drips. So guess what you need? Protocols, standing orders, and you need training. Now draw your attention down there to that note in blue. It's not the expectation of me that you guys have a written order or a protocol or standing order for every potential antibiotic that you might ever transport. There's probably a couple of ways that the list could be huge. So it's not what I'm asking you to do. what I'm asking you to do is get with your physician medical directors and have a real conversation about how you can handle this. And this actually would apply to the paramedic level as well if you haven't already addressed it. But figure out how you can handle this. Maybe it's really we only ever transport 2 or 3 of these antibiotics out of here, and we want to write something specific to those 2 or 3. Maybe the physician medical director is able to come up with a protocol or standing order which basically says, look, the only actions that we're going to do with these drips if they're hanging is monitor the patient to be sure they're not having an anaphylactic reaction. If you think that they are having one, cut the drip off, give them some Benadryl and some steroids, and drive on with it, and manage them as an allergic reaction from that point. I don't know what all of those answers might be, but that's why I'm telling you, get your physician medical directors again, have them sit down and talk this through with them. I think there's a couple of ways to skin the cat on handling this, but I don't want you to have to write not expecting you to develop and write protocols and standing orders for every potential antibiotic. Paramedics, you don't get a section in rule. Go see the National EMS scope of practice model. But guess what? Based off of this and things that I've alluded to, this still means that paramedics need protocols and standing orders, and you still need training. And you need to study, you need to learn what your profession is. And that bullet bottom hint there that I'm giving you, if Andy's making such a big point of telling you this, there's probably something behind it, okay? So some of you know some of the issues that we've dealt with in the state, some of you don't, but I'm telling you guys, even if you're a paramedic, go in, learn what it is that you can do and what you can't do. You ought to be dragging those protocols out in the scope of practice and be doing a 1-hour refresher every year or 2 anyway on just what the authorizations are from the state. So, that being said, so here's a brief word about how this scope of practice model works. And this is what I want to emphasize to you in terms of training and protocols. The scope of practice model requires that all levels, if you're licensed in the state, the way that we wrote it, all levels, you've got to be trained, certified, licensed, and authorized. If you don't have all 4 and you can't verify that you have all 4, don't do it. Now that seems really odd, but this is almost exactly the same methodology in which other healthcare professions apply to determining whether or not any given thing that they're doing on any given day is allowable or not. In the nursing world, they refer to this as a decision tree. Have I been trained? Am I certified? Am I licensed? Am I authorized to do it? Am I competent? And if I can't answer that with a definitive yes, then I probably need to stay away from doing that. So this gets a little confusing, but starting from the upper left corner there where it says your school or course, that's your initial EMT course or your initial paramedic course or whatever the case might be. That's your training. That's what starts you on this path to being able to do things within the state. Looking over to the right there, I'm going around clockwise. Certified is competent. The agency does this. Well, what does that mean? Well, Andy, doesn't the National Registry certify? Yep, they certify. And so does the American Heart Association, the American Red Cross, and a bunch of other organizations that are too numerous to list here. Lots of places do certification. This is a question that we came up with. We talked about the debate between what does certified mean versus being licensed. And there's where we draw the line as it relates to Wyoming. Anybody can certify. You go take an American Heart Association ACLS course, you will be certified in ACLS. That American Heart Association certification does not give you permission to do anything. So the agency, in this context, what does it mean the agency is certifying? Well, that means that the agency themselves has brought you in as an employee or as a member of that organization and says, okay, I'm glad to know that you're licensed in the state of Wyoming. I'm glad to know that you have a National Registry card. I'm glad to know that you've been in EMS for 17, 18 years, whatever the case might be. But before you turn a wheel or go up in an aircraft belonging to this organization, we're going to make sure that you know, in fact, know what you're doing. And we're going to put you through an orientation process. And you're going to take a test on our local protocols. And you're going to meet with our physician medical director, whatever the case might be. So the certification as it is here, that is you satisfactorily meeting the requirements of your agency to go out and do things. Working down to the bottom, state license to practice. So you have to have this in there. This is where our role is, based on whether you've taken the National Registry, whether you've passed the state exam, whether you've met the other qualifications for licensure at whatever level. The state is the one that determines that, yes, you've met the minimum qualifications for licensure and sets the scope of practice. And then you can go out and do those things, assuming that your agency certifies and says, yep, you can do it. And also assuming, in EMS world, that you have a physician medical director that has written a protocol or standing order, and that ties directly back to state law that says that for those things that are considered procedures and may be considered the practice of medicine, you have to have a written order. You don't get to you're not an independent practitioner. You have to have a written order that says you can go out and you can do those things. And I know that that's all very familiar to all of you who have been in medicine for a long time. What I'm trying to emphasize to you here is that you have this Venn diagram of things that have to be done before you actually go out and do things. As it relates to the protocols and standing orders, this is kind of related to, we field this question every now and then. From our position, we are happy if you want us to take a look at your protocols and standing orders and kind of go through them with you and suggest changes and see if they meet requirements. We're happy to do it, but we don't require that you do that before you go into operation. These protocols and standing orders can be extensive, 200-300 pages sometimes. That's a lot of paperwork for us to file through. And what we want to create is to put the burden of responsibility onto you guys and your medical directors to go through all of those materials. It's your responsibility to make sure that you've addressed everything, that you haven't exceeded the scope of practice within the state, and align those things. We're happy to help to the extent that we can, but no, you don't have to wait on us to be able to put a protocol and standing order in place and start making that magic happen at a local level. All right, so a projected calendar for these rules. And we already started getting some questions in through the chat as to when do we expect them to be finalized. So this is kind of the way that this works. Once I have all of this reviewed through the Department of Health, and we're working on that process now, I go and I will meet with the director, and I will explain all of the changes and why we're doing them, and he will make the determination as to whether or not we can proceed or whether or not he wants some revisions. So I don't even have that on the books yet, that meeting. But let's assume, for the sake of this example, that I meet with the director on March 1st. Now, I'm going to say this again because somebody will come back and say, well, you said you were going to meet with the director on March 1st. No, that's not what I'm saying. This is an example. If I meet with the director on March 1st, the governor would then have 10 days to do his review and approval to allow the rules to start the process. So that would put us out to March 11th. He would have up till March 11th to give us the go-ahead. Once we get the go-ahead from the governor, we are required by law to keep the public comment period open for 45 days. If nobody raises a serious objection or there's no big problem with the rules, and everything goes according to plan, then the public comment period will close on day 45. That would be April 24th, and we could continue on with the process. If there are serious objections, or if we have to make substantive changes within the rules, then we actually have to start back over at the top and go through the whole process again. But at any rate, so if everything goes smoothly and there's no issues and we've done our homework on the front end, the public comment period would close on April 24th, and then that begins the start of a 75-day period. That is actually the governor's 75 days, in which the rules are reviewed by the Legislative Service Office on behalf of the governor. They provide their comments. They give their counsel to the governor on whether or not he should sign the rules or not sign them, or tell us to go back over and start over, or strike certain things, or add certain things. So that at the end of that 75 days, that would be July 8th. Now that's assuming that we get everything going on March 1st. That's going to be really tough to do. The legislature is in town. That's taking up a lot of the director's time. I don't know if I can get on his schedule that fast. I will certainly try. I talked to the person who handles that on behalf of the director today. She's well aware that we need to get on his calendar, but it just may or may not happen. But nonetheless, the legislature is projected to finish up on March 10th unless something goes squirrely there. But I'm just trying to be realistic about the time frame. So that may mean then that if we keep going further to the right in the calendar, then it could well be late July or early August before we finally get these done. I hope that it's not that late, but you know, that's the worst case projection. Okay, we're going to take some questions. By the way, if you haven't seen it, that is our official Wyoming patch up there. We have a stock of them here. You can contact us if you need these for your organization. I'm really super proud of them. I think they look really great. The one that you're seeing there is just the generic one example that we had. So they are level specific for paramedic, IEMT, AEMT, whatever your level is. We're probably going to go ahead and get some for nurses. We're just trying to figure out what we're going to put on the bottom, and you know, probably get a couple for physician medical directors as well if you want them. But we can make that magic happen. I'm going to take a drink of water, and then we're going to start answering some questions. Okay. So Jesse Kramer asked, when do you expect these changes to take effect? I think I answered that question, Jesse. If you're still have questions, you can certainly add that in, or you can put it in there. Will the National Registry certification be required by the time of recertification by EMT, AEMT, and paramedics? I'm a little confused as to that question. If you're getting to the question, do I have to maintain the National Registry? The answer is no. The requirement under replica and what we've got in rules is for the initial licensing. That's your testing mechanism to get in there. My personal recommendation and stance on that is that you maintain that National Registry. I still keep mine up, as do many of the folks here within my office. But no, it's not a requirement as right now as it relates to remaining licensed within the state. So I hope I answered that question. That was from Dan Evans, and I hope you got it. Okay, from Mike Hotchkiss, the national scope of practice for paramedics does not include surgical cribs. You are correct. And there was a sidebar discussion that was going on in here. We had opened up the surgical crike piece related directly, actually as a requirement, if your service was going to be doing RSI. You are correct. Mike, I've taken that under advisement. I think we do need to add it because we've never had it in rules. So that's probably a fairly, not a significant enough change, I think, to come back and do the webinar again. But unless someone from the governor's committee tells me that, no, it's a really bad idea, we'll probably go ahead and add surgical crike into the paramedic scope of practice. From Priscilla Allen, foreign nationals responding to a disaster may not be trained to National Registry standard and may need a downgrade when seeking emergency licensure. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know that I have an answer for you except to say this, that if something has gone so drastically wrong that we're bringing foreign nationals in to help us respond to that, then there's probably been either a gubernatorial or a presidential declaration of a disaster, in which case they're in charge and the Wyoming Office of EMS is just along for the ride. That's a great point. I'll have to let my brain spin on that a little bit, but it's the best I can give you as it relates to that one. From Dr. Selby, how will the list of medications change in light of a drug shortage? I'm assuming that you're referring to what we got in rule for the IEMT. Yep, that's a tough one. I would say that and Doc Selby, you have welcome to email me specifically as it relates to this if you have something in mind. Several of the changes that we incorporated into the IEMT were related to drug shortages. You know, we would certainly have the authority to do emergency rules if things got that bad. We wouldn't have to go through all of this process if we run directly into that and we need to do a change. If you know of something, because you guys are much more attuned to what you can get hold of and what you can't. If you know of something right now that we need to be aware of, you may have picked up on that before we do. Email us now. Let's see if we can address it now. The best answer I can give is to say that, you know, we would probably have to do an emergency rule, a rule change in order to account for that. So I don't know if I got to you either, Dr. Selby, but feel free to email me. Mike Hotchkiss again, gastric decompression through a supraglottic airway, i.e. the king tube, would be a beneficial skill for AEMTs or EMTIs. Interesting question. One of my people will make a note of that, and I will kick that out to the Governor's Advisory Committee and get their thoughts on that. Can't give you an answer right off the fly, Mike, but happy to take a look at it. Seems reasonable. Will there be any changes for EMRs to do blood glucose? We've talked about this one quite extensively. Off the cuff, I would tell you that, you know, that there's no point in checking a blood glucose if you don't have something added into the scope of practice in order to do something about it. So, so my response to you is, I don't necessarily have a problem with it because I think that it's a pretty, certainly a low risk procedure. But what we really need to talk about is, you know, do we really need that to happen? And what would you do about it if you did find a blood glucose, or a low blood glucose? And what would we add in there? So we're just going to note that, and that's probably another topic that we could take up with the advisory committee. From Tony Colbert, at recert time, do the paramedics just submit their national paramedic number? How do we handle the different recertification times, i.e. national recert is in March? Never mind, you just answered the question. Great. I'm so good, I don't even know how good I am sometimes. I'll tell you, I will comment on this to say that we did have a discussion recently about how we can make this even less painful for all of you as it relates to the those of you that maintain the National Registry and maintain state licensure both. What we do now have, it was a subtle change, you may have picked up on it or not. What we do now have is the statute, the EMS Act no longer specifies, we don't have to make your Wyoming license expire on December 31st of every year. Now, we have not implemented anything related to that because we're sitting here scratching our heads kind of trying to figure out, well, how would we do this? What's the best way to make it painless So Tony, I would tell you that, you know, this is still a topic for discussion. And you know, with the Leader Summit that's coming up in May, that would be a great thing for us to kick around and see what ideas we come up with. But we do want to make it painless as we can for you folks. From Tony Straub, how do RNs and RTs fit into the definition of EMR in your state for required licensure to service patients in your state? You do not fit into the definition of EMR. The reason is that registered nurses and respiratory therapists have their own licensing boards in Wyoming. So the question is really answered by this, is that if you are going to function on a Wyoming licensed ambulance service, and that doesn't mean just an ambulance service that is in Wyoming, it means an ambulance service, be it ground or be it air, that is licensed to operate in Wyoming, and you have clinical providers on there, RNs and RTs, EMTs, paramedics, whatever it is that you fly. If that person is a licensed profession, then they probably need to be licensed in the state in order to function. We don't actually address respiratory therapists specifically in our rules, but be advised that just because that respiratory therapist is on an ambulance or in a helicopter and providing care to a patient, there is a board that determines what those, in Wyoming, that determines what those respiratory therapists can and cannot do. And I would be willing to bet you that that requirement says if you're going to operate as an RT in Wyoming, you must be licensed by the appropriate board. So I hope I got to your question, Tony. From Russ Christensen, adding surgical cracks, we already talked about that. Will Foley catheters and NG tubes be part of the scope of practice model? I believe that NG tubes are already addressed, and I think that Foley's are as well, but I have to double check on that one. I don't have Brandon's digging through it as we speak. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but I was pretty sure that Foley catheterization was included in there, and I'm 99% sure that NG tubes are as well. So we'll try to get you an answer on that one before we hang this up. From Scott Bagnall, so we wait to use the scope of practice changes until August or close to August. No, what you wait for is for the word from me saying these rules are finalized and you're good to go. I know that that is painful and it's long, but that is the way that the bureaucratic process works. That is the reason that it's broken out like that, is to give you the opportunity to interact with me, to do exactly this sort of thing that we're doing, come up with other ideas and write it in there. This is how you actually participate in the lawmaking process within Wyoming. So yeah, it may be August, it may be later than August, it may be earlier than August if everything goes really fast. The governor doesn't have to take 75 days. He can take 2 days if he wants. We'll try to spur that along as fast as we can. I was just trying to paint what could be the worst case scenario. But yeah, this is not rule until it's finalized and filed with the Secretary of State. All right, we had another question pop in. Why can't a firefighter who is also EMS currently administer Narcan? I'm not sure what's behind that question. I guess the question lies in what is your license level? EMS isn't really a license level. Are you an EMT, a paramedic, or whatever the case might be? But the answer to that question is you need a written protocol or standing order in order to be able to administer Narcan, because that's how the law works in Wyoming. Now, it gets confusing with the approach that the state has now taken, and many of you have probably seen Narcan start showing up in the hands of your law enforcement and bystanders or whatever the case might be. But you know that if you are one of those license levels, get a medical director for your agency. Many fire departments do have medical directors that oversee their EMTs, their EMRs, their paramedics, and they operate in a very similar fashion, and that's how you would do it. Just want to confirm that we will continue to utilize the current scope of practice in place from your office until we are advised differently from the Office of EMS. You are correct, Tony. It's kind of the answer I gave previously. Everything stays in place until we get this done. Russ, backing up, here's the answer from Brandon. Looking through the NG tubes are definitely in there. It looks like the Foleys are not. We'll add that to the list of things to take up with the position, or I'm sorry, the Governor's Advisory Committee. I don't have a problem with that, and I think we can add it in there. From Dr. Seldy again, along those lines, who is supervising and training law enforcement in the use of Narcan? Excellent question, Doc, and when you find out, let us know. We've been asked, we've assisted with, we did a little bit of training as it relates to DCI. That falls outside of our purview to provide that training to everybody. We did produce a training for DCI to use for all of their officers that were not at the 1 or 2 sessions that we did. That may start circulating around. You know, I think to really answer your question, Doc, it would not be a bad thing for EMS to engage with the firefighting or the fire agencies and law enforcement agencies and offer to help out to make sure that way you know that the training is getting done right. But it's kind of just thrown out in there, and that's correct. But Jason just threw up in there that WASCOP, that's the Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, is sponsoring a training program, and that is to whom we provided the training and gave them training materials. So from Ken McCauley, if our fire department has a standing order for Narcan, can an EMR, EMT firefighter currently administer Narcan? Yes, if it is in their scope of practice. So let me back that up. The answer to that is no. It's how we ended up in this this upside down situation, because the legislature was able to push it through faster than we were. So, you know, my best answer, Ken, is, you know, why don't you give either me or Brandon a call if you've got a real issue there, and let us help talk you through that, because it gets confusing even for us. For Mike Hotchkiss, Section 8, upgrade of a license expires at the date of the previous license.
I'll talk to you. What?
Reasoning.
What chapter?
It's going to show up in chapter 16. Well, it's hard for me to answer the question and read it at the same time, but I guess my reasoning at that point was to say, right now all of the licenses expire on December 31st. So, and the way that the law is constructed, until we figure out something differently, we can't issue you a license for more than 2 years. So we can't go more than 24 months. So as I recall, what we also said in there was that if a person does a course to upgrade a license, I'm an EMT and I went to paramedic school, that we would count that as having met all of the renewal requirements, so that you didn't have to dual license, or I'm sorry, to do dual requirements. So let's say your EMT license expires, December 31st of 2018, and you complete paramedic course this year. The idea would be that come November or December of 2018, you would send us your stuff saying, hey, I've been in paramedic school, can I renew? And we would go ahead and do it. And then that gets us around having to upgrade your license and then extend a date out to some point that we can't do. Now, that was the whole idea behind that. It's really, really tough figuring out these expirations and new licenses and when does one kick in and when does one not. We'll go back and we'll take a look at that and see if it makes sense. My assurances to you, Mike, and everybody else that's on the call, we have really tried to make the renewal process not burdensome, and it would not be, you know, we don't want to put you in a predicament where you're trying to go to paramedic school and then also trying to meet the requirements for renewal. And I hope that you've seen that out of our office, you know, that if we end up with somebody caught with their tail in a crack, call us and we'll see what we can work out to make this not painful. So, all right. I'm going to give it just a couple of seconds to see if anybody else has a final question that they want to jam in here. And while you're thinking of other questions, I'll tell you this. I didn't put my contact information on that last slide, but I think many of you, you already got my email. If you don't, and you've got anybody in this office, if you have their email, if you've got a question, a suggestion, a comment on these rules, give us a nod, send it to us. We got a bunch of things that we can throw out real quick to the advisory committee and get a thumb up or thumb down and see if they all think it's a great idea. But barring that, my intent is to proceed with these just as fast as I can. If you've got serious issues or hang-ups, please get them to me before March 1st. I'll try to address your questions, and maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I'm going to try to get these going. So try to get your stuff to me by March 1st if you have it. And I hope that these are good things. I believe that they are for the state. It's a work in progress in terms of clarifying rules and making changes to scope of practice. But, you know, we're trying. So appreciate all your time today. We went just a little bit over an hour. We'll get the recorded presentation hung up on the website where you can find it. If you don't have the draft rules that we were talked about today, we'll get those hung out there on the website as well so that you can download them. And I'll try to keep you all informed as we go along. So with that being said, call Brandon, get a patch. And other than that, thanks for everything that you do, and you know, stay safe out there. Thank you.